You know, when we walk through the world, we are constantly making these split-second judgments about value.
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Right. Like, we look at a building or a car or, I don't know, a piece of clothing, and our brains just instantly calculate it. We go, okay, that's cheap or that's expensive, ordinary, important. It's almost automatic.
Yeah, we really think we're being completely objective, like we're just faithfully reading the raw physical reality of the world around us.
Exactly. But what if I told you there is a specific technology, like an ancient, highly engineered technology that was designed specifically to hack that visual system?
It sounds like science fiction when you put it like that.
It really does, but it's a technology that tricks your eye, it absorbs light, and it literally trains your brain to perceive whatever it touches as inherently more valuable, more powerful, and, untouchable.
And the craziest part of all this is that it is probably sitting in your house right now.
Yes. You have definitely seen it 1,000 times in movies, and you probably just think of it as like a fancy decoration. We are talking about velvet.
Velvet. It is such a massive topic.
It is. So, welcome to the deep dive. For those of you listening, you are the curious minds seeking a shortcut to being well-informed, and today we are exploring a massive, frankly, a wild stack of sources.
We really are. We've got historical textile records, global trade logs, metallurgical history, and even a modern psychological profile from a behavioral study.
Yeah, and our mission today is to use all of it to uncover how this specific structural arrangement of threads-funded empires hid brutal human labor and ultimately acts as this psychological tool to enforce human hierarchy.
It is a sprawling story. It connects biology to early computer science and eventually all the way to modern social media.
So to help us synthesize this massive timeline, we have our expert guide here. And I have to say, your digital backdrop today is really setting the mood.
Yeah, I changed it up for this one. We are currently in a rich, dimly lit room. The walls are completely lined with these heavy crimson velvet theater curtains that just absorb every bit of echo.
It looks so quiet in there.
It feels incredibly quiet. And scattered on the heavy wooden tables around me are antique tailoring tools. So I've got iron shears, massive spools of raw silk thread, and these incredibly thin brass wires.
It's so atmospheric, almost heavy.
Well, velvet is, above all things, a creator of atmosphere.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to start with the grand illusion itself. Going through these notes, the most fundamental misconception about velvet is what it actually is.
Right. This is where everyone gets tripped up.
Totally. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. I mean, I always assumed velvet was a raw material, like wool or cashmere or cotton.
That is definitely the most common and perhaps the most important misconception we have to break right out of the gate. Velvet is not a raw material.
So you can't, harvest it?
No, you cannot grow velvet in a field. You cannot shear velvet off an animal. Velvet is not a fiber at all. It is a structure.
A structure that is so counterintuitive.
I know, but it is an incredibly deliberate, engineered pile construction. Its entire identity, its entire power, really, comes from a very specific architectural arrangement of threads.
Okay, so if I'm looking at a standard piece of fabric, say a linen shirt or just a basic cotton bed sheet, that's traditional flat weaving, right?
Precisely. That flat grid is the foundation.
Right, so you have your warp threads pulled tight going up and down the loom and your weft threads weaving left and right, over and under. It just creates a flat grid.
Exactly. And that flat grid is the basis of almost all textiles.
Yeah.
But velvet adds a third dimension.
A third dimension.
Yeah. Velvet requires that traditional woven ground, the base layer, but it incorporates these extra threads that are forced to rise vertically from that base.
Oh, wow.
They stand straight up,
Yeah.
and then they are cut, creating this dense, upright forest of fibers on the surface. And that cut surface is what we actually call the pile.
The pile. Okay. The engineering behind this is just staggering to me, especially when you realize human beings were figuring this out hundreds of years ago.
Completely by hand, too. No lasers, no automated tension sensors.
Exactly. The notes detail 2 traditional methods for achieving this vertical forest, and I was just trying to wrap my head around the sheer mechanical difficulty of it. The first one is called the wire velvet method.
Yes, the wire method. It was an absolute feat of precision and agonizing patience.
How on earth did a medieval weaver accomplish this?
Well, imagine you are the weaver, right? You're sitting at this massive wooden loom. In the wire method, as you are weaving that flat base fabric we talked about, you have to periodically stop.
Stop weaving entirely.
Yes, you stop and you take a perfectly straight, incredibly thin metal rod, often a brass wire, and you lay it horizontally across the loom, right over the base you were weaving.
Okay, so you just have a metal stick lying across your work.
Right. Then you take a separate set of warp threads. These are the extra threads dedicated solely to creating the pile. And you loop them tightly over that brass wire.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Once the loops are secure, you weave a little more of the flat base fabric to lock those loops in place. Then you insert another wire. You loop the extra threads over that second wire. You weave a little more base.
Wire, loop, base. Wire, loop, base. Over and over.
Exactly.
That sounds absolutely mind-numbing. You are just building row after row of tiny tensioned loops over metal rods.
Yes, but here is where the absolute mastery comes in. Once you have woven a few inches and you have a series of these wires trapped in the fabric, you take a specialized tool called a trivet.
A trivet? What is that?
It's essentially this heavily weighted, incredibly sharp blade. You run that blade right along the top of the brass wire, slicing through the very top of every single loop in that row.
Wait, so the wire itself acts as like the cutting guide?
Exactly. The wire actually has a tiny groove in it to guide the blade.
Oh.
So you slice the loops, you pull the wire out from the side, and what's left behind.
The cut ends.
Yes. Those loops are now individual threads standing perfectly straight up. That's the cut pile.
And what if your hand shakes? Or, I don't know, what if the blade is dull?
Well, if the blade is dull, you pull the threads and ruin the tension of the entire fabric.
Oh, no.
And if your hand slips and you cut too deep, you don't just mess up the pile. You slice right through the base fabric, effectively destroying weeks of work in a single second.
The stress of that is unbelievable. Now, if they don't cut it and they just pull the wire out, that's what we call looped pile, right? Like a terry cloth bath towel.
Correct.
But taking that blade to it, exposing the cut ends of the thread, that is the defining act that makes it velvet. Now, the notes also break down a second historical method, the double cloth method.
Ah, yes. The double cloth method.
And initially I was trying to picture this like an ice cream sandwich, but the notes say that metaphor doesn't actually work, does it? Because an ice cream sandwich has a solid block in the middle.
Right. The ice cream sandwich analogy falls apart when you look closely at the mechanics.
Yeah.
A much better way to visualize the double cloth method is to imagine a dense forest.
Okay, I'm picturing a forest.
The loom is set up to weave two entirely separate base fabrics at the exact same time.
Wait, two at once. That sounds impossible.
It's incredibly complex. One base fabric is the ground, where the roots of our metaphorical forest are woven. The second base fabric is suspended just above it, parallel, like the sky or the canopy.
Okay, ground and sky.
Right. And as the loom operates, the extra pile threads weave frantically back and forth, up and down, connecting the ground fabric to the canopy fabric.
So the pile threads are like the trunks of the trees, connecting the earth to the sky.
Exactly. You are weaving a connected three-dimensional block. And once that dense, connected forest is woven, a specialized blade moves horizontally right through the dead center of the gap between the two base fabrics.
Oh, so it's like a giant lumberjack slicing through the middle of every single tree trunk at the exact same time.
That is a perfect way to put it.
That makes perfect sense. The two base fabrics fall away from each other, and you are left with two completely separate pieces of velvet, each with a freshly cut pile surface facing inward.
Yes. And that is incredibly efficient compared to the wire method. But the tension control required to keep those two base fabrics perfectly parallel must have been a nightmare.
I can't even imagine. But the result of either of these methods, this vertical forest of cut, exposed threads, that is what creates the defining physical characteristic of velvet, right?
Yeah.
The nap.
He's a man.
This is where the magic really happens. To me, the nap is like mowing a lawn.
How so?
Well, you know how when you push the lawnmower in one direction, the grass bends away from you and looks light green, and then when you turn around and mow the other way, the grass bends toward you and looks dark green.
Oh, yes, the directional shift.
Right. Or like when you run your hand over a freshly vacuumed carpet and it leaves a dark streak and you have to brush it back the other way to erase it. Velvet does exactly that, doesn't it?
It does. Because the fibers are standing up, they have a natural directional lean, just like those blades of grass.
Oh.
When you run your hand with the nap, it feels perfectly smooth, and it actually looks lighter. When you run your hand against the nap, it feels slightly rougher and looks darker.
Yeah, I felt that before on like a velvet jacket.
But what's fascinating here is the physics of how that physical structure interacts with light.
Because it's not a flat surface anymore.
Precisely. If you shine a light on a flat piece of silk or flat cotton, the light hits the surface and reflects back relatively uniformly. It has a sheen.
Right.
But velvet is a three-dimensional trap. When light hits velvet, some of it reflects off the sides of the fibers, giving it that characteristic shimmering halo. But a massive percentage of the light plunges straight down into that dense forest of upright threads.
It just gets trapped between the tree trunks.
Yes, it bounces around inside the pile, losing energy with every bounce until it's completely absorbed. The light goes in, and it doesn't come out.
Which is why the colors look so intense. The historical notes mention that black velvet in the 16th century was considered the ultimate luxury because it looked bottomless.
Bottomless. That's a great word for it.
It's almost like a black hole for light. It creates this massive visual density. When you move around a person wearing velvet, the light is constantly shifting between reflection and total absorption. It really makes the material seem alive.
And this is exactly where the psychology begins. Human brains interpret that total light absorption as physical density, and we intuitively link physical density to high value and high status.
Right. It looks heavy, significant, deep.
But this introduces a massive paradox, and honestly, this is one of the central themes of our entire discussion today.
The fatal flaw of the structure.
Exactly. The very structure that makes velvet look dominant, bottomless, and powerful is actually highly vulnerable.
Because it's literally just the exposed cut ends of microscopic threads standing straight up in the air.
Yes. That cut surface is completely unforgiving.
I mean, think about flat woven silk. You can fold it, sit on it, pack it in a trunk, and while it might wrinkle, the fundamental structure remains intact.
Right. But velvet is different. Pressure, seams, a heavy iron, abrasion, or even just high humidity. If you sit on a velvet chair for too long, or if you fold a velvet cloak improperly, those upright fibers get crushed.
They just bend under the weight.
And because they bend, they reflect light differently. They leave a permanent dark mark or shiny bruised spot. And if the fibers are crushed hard enough, they never stand back up. The structure is broken.
I've seen that, like on old velvet couches where the armrests are completely shiny and flattened out, while the rest of the couch is dark and rich.
Exactly. It performs dominance, but it requires incredibly careful, almost paranoid handling.
That is such a profound physical contradiction. It projects an image of being completely in charge, but the moment you treat it roughly, it bruises permanently.
It is a delicate illusion. And because velvet is this complex, highly engineered, and highly vulnerable structure, it couldn't just be discovered by accident.
Right. You didn't just stumble upon velvet the way ancient people stumbled upon felt.
No, felt happens naturally.
Right. If you put raw wool in your shoes, the sweat and the heat and friction naturally mat the fibers together into a solid fabric. It's an accidental discovery. But nobody accidentally sets up a double cloth loom with thousands of vertical threads and accidentally slices them perfectly down the middle with a specialized blade.
Exactly. Velvet had to be deliberately engineered by a society that had already mastered complex agriculture, advanced loom mechanics, and importantly, a society that had the surplus time and wealth to chase aesthetic luxury rather than just basic survival.
Which brings us to the geography of all this.
Yeah.
Because the physical reality of how velvet is made dictated exactly where in the world it was born.
The location is key here.
It is, and this was a huge surprise to me when I was going through the historical texts in our source stack. If you had asked me yesterday, I would have confidently said velvet was an inherently European invention.
Most people do.
Right. I picture Henry VIII, I picture Renaissance Italy, French royalty. But velvet was not born in Europe.
Not at all. Europe eventually took over the global branding of velvet, but they absolutely did not invent the structure.
So where did it come from?
The most credible archaeological and textual evidence we have places the early development of true, complex silk velvet in China, at least by the 13th century, during the Song or Yuan dynasties, and quite possibly even earlier.
Wow.
From there, the technology migrated westward and was intensely refined in the Islamic world, specifically in Persia, Central Asia, and the Ottoman Empire.
So to understand the birth of velvet, we really have to look at the societies that had the specific raw materials required to engineer it. Let's talk about the absolute gold standard, the prestige foundation of all historical velvet. Silk.
Yes, silk.
Why was silk the necessary fiber for early velvet? Why not wool or flax?
Well, it comes down to the biological properties of the fiber itself. Silk is a protein fiber produced by the silkworm, specifically the Bombyx mori caterpillar, as it spins its cocoon.
Okay, worms.
What makes silk entirely unique in the natural world is that a single cocoon is made of one ultra-fine, continuous filament. A single thread from one cocoon can be up to 900 meters long.
Wait, really? Nearly a kilometer of continuous thread from one bug. That is insane to me.
It is, and that continuous length gives silk incredible tensile strength, despite being thinner than a human hair.
Right, which you need for the high tension of the loom.
Exactly. Furthermore, silk naturally has a triangular, prism-like cross-section, which refracts light beautifully.
Hmm.
When you stand thousands of these tiny prisms straight up in a velvet pile, the optical effect is just mesmerizing.
So wool wouldn't work.
Wool is too thick and matte. Flax is too brittle. Silk was the only fiber that could truly bring the velvet structure to life.
But getting that silk is a logistical nightmare. The notes point out the brutal reality of sericulture, the farming of silk. You can't just plant a seed and walk away. You need incredibly specific environmental conditions.
You do. You need temperate, humid climates to grow white mulberry trees. Because the Bombyx mori silkworm is a monophagous insect, it will only eat fresh mulberry leaves.
Wow, picky eaters.
Very. And it eats them voraciously. An entire agricultural sector had to be dedicated just to feeding the caterpillars.
And then there's the harvesting process, which is, honestly, a little dark.
It is a bit grim.
To preserve that continuous 900-meter filament to keep the thread as long and strong as possible for the loom, you have to harvest the cocoon before the moth emerges.
Yes.
Because if you let nature take its course, the moth secretes an enzyme that burns a hole through the cocoon and it chews its way out.
Correct. When the moth breaks out, it severs that continuous filament into hundreds of short, weak, tangled pieces. It completely ruins the structural integrity needed for high-tension weaving.
So how do they stop the moth?
Historically, and largely still today, the intact cocoons are plunged into boiling water or blasted with steam while the pupa is still inside.
Oh, wow. So they just boil them alive.
Yeah. Yes. The heat kills the developing moth instantly, but it also serves a second, crucial mechanical purpose. The boiling water melts away the sericin.
Sericin, what's that?
Sericin is the natural, sticky gum that the caterpillar secretes to glue the cocoon together. It's hard as rock. The boiling water softens this gum, allowing the workers to locate the microscopic end of the filament and slowly reel it off the cocoon, perfectly intact.
Okay, so if you are making velvet out of silk, you are combining two incredibly labor-intensive, delicate processes. You've got the massive biological coordination of farming and reeling millions of silkworm cocoons, and the agonizing mechanical precision of pile weaving on a wire loom.
Exactly.
You are combining thousands of hours of labor before you even have a single yard of fabric. That means velvet only appears when a society has stopped just surviving. You need massive surplus wealth.
And this geographical reality tied velvet directly to the Silk Road. Because of the immense labor and biological constraints, silk velvet was the ultimate trade good for these early global networks.
I mean, think about it from the perspective of a 14th century merchant leading a caravan across the deserts of Central Asia. Logistics dictate everything.
Exactly. Weight and space are your absolute limits on a camel or in the hold of a wooden ship.
Right.
You cannot transport bulky, low-value goods across continents. It costs more to feed the caravan than the goods are worth. But a bolt of silk velvet, it is incredibly lightweight and compact relative to its astronomical value.
You can pack a few trunks of velvet onto a camel, and it represents enough wealth to buy a small town.
It really was condensed transportable power.
And the velvet didn't sustain life. You know, you can't eat it. It's not particularly warm or waterproof. It existed purely to signal wealth. And that brings us back to Europe, because eventually the Italian city-states like Venice, Florence, Genoa, they get their hands on this trade.
This is where the story shifts from engineering to pure marketing and monetization.
Okay, tell me about the Italians.
The Italians, particularly in the 14th and 15th centuries, realized the power of this material. They didn't invent the velvet structure, but they imported the raw silk, stole or adapted the loom technology from the East, and set up massive, highly organized guild systems in their own cities.
So they basically took a foreign luxury good and decided, we are going to make our version the most desirable, aggressively branded material on planet Earth, and we are going to sell it back to everyone at a massive markup.
They did. And to justify the markup, the Italian weavers pushed the technology to its absolute limit.
Yeah.
They introduced complex multi-level pile designs.
Multi-level.
Yeah, they would weave a piece of velvet where some of the pile was cut high and some was cut low, creating a three-dimensional sculptural effect.
Oh, and the voided velvet. So I was reading about this in the notes. This blew my mind.
It's incredible.
Voided velvet is where the pattern is created by intentionally leaving certain areas completely flat without any pile at all. How do you even program that into a hand loom?
It requires an unbelievable level of mathematical planning. The weaver has to calculate exactly which warp threads to loop over the brass wire and which threads to leave lying flat against the base fabric.
So you might have like a shimmering, flat satin background, and rising out of it is a raised, bottomless velvet pile in the shape of a pomegranate or an artichoke, which the notes say were very popular Renaissance motifs.
Yes, very popular.
And then they added gold, because of course they did.
Yes, the boucle or cloth of gold velvets. They would incorporate actual metal thread silk cores wrapped in microscopic layers of hammered gold or silver into the base fabric.
Wow.
So as the wearer moved, the light would flash off the solid gold background and then be swallowed entirely by the raised silk velvet pile. It was a visual assault of wealth.
They literally weaponized the aesthetic. It was early global capitalism at work. Venice wasn't just selling fabric. They were selling the ultimate status symbol to the kings of France, the nobles of England, and the emerging wealthy merchant class across Europe.
It was a very lucrative monopoly.
But this intense Italian branding campaign created a massive problem. To maintain the illusion that velvet was this divine, effortless, magical material, the merchants had to completely hide the brutal reality of how it was actually made.
Yes. The power that velvet projected out into the world was directly proportional to the invisible human labor required to construct it. We've talked about the wire loom, but we haven't truly talked about the human beings sitting in those dark, humid workshops.
The physical and mental stress of this work sounds agonizing. The historical records in the notes talk about the physical ailments of the weavers. You have individuals hunched over a massive wooden frame for 12 to 14 hours a day.
The physical toll was severe. Weavers frequently suffered from permanent skeletal deformities, particularly in the spine and the shoulders, from the constant reaching and throwing of the heavy shuttle.
That sounds awful.
Furthermore, the workshops had to be kept slightly damp.
Damp. Why would they want it damp?
Because if the air gets too dry, the raw silk threads become brittle and snap under the immense tension of the loom. So you have workers sitting in damp, drafty rooms destroying their joints.
Oh, man.
And remember, they are working with microscopic threads. The eye strain was catastrophic. Many master weavers went legally blind in their later years.
And they are memorizing these complex, voided pomegranate patterns without a computer screen or even a written guide in front of them. It was all tacit knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Held in the brain and the muscle memory.
Entirely.
One mistake, one missed wire, one sneeze while holding the trivet blade, and a piece of velvet that took 3 months to weave is ruined. The patron won't buy it. The guild won't accept it.
Its trust must have been suffocating. But the notes highlight a fascinating, deeply systemic split in how this labor was recognized and rewarded within those Italian and wider European guild systems.
The gender divide. This is where the history gets really frustrating. Because the guild systems, the organizations that controlled prices, quality, and training, they were heavily regulated and incredibly powerful. But they were also entirely exclusionary.
Very much so. The recognized, celebrated masters of the Velvet Guilds, the individuals whose names were recorded in the ledgers, the ones doing the visible weeding on the looms, holding the titles, and accumulating the massive wealth, were almost entirely men.
But those men couldn't have woven a single inch of velvet without an entire hidden infrastructure of labor supporting them.
Precisely. Women formed the invisible, indispensable backbone of the velvet industry. They were the ones doing the sericulture. They were boiling the cocoons.
The really hard prep work.
They were doing that incredibly tedious, low-status work of reeling the silk, spinning the yarns, and preparing the vats for the dyers.
So they were doing the messy biological, chemical prep work, but they were locked out of the guilds. They couldn't become master weavers. They couldn't put their name on the final product.
No. They were systematically paid a fraction of what the male weavers earned, and their labor was deliberately kept out of the public eye. The illusion of luxury requires the erasure of the sweat.
The central human tension here is profound. It's like looking at a swan gliding across a lake. It looks perfectly calm, elegant, and effortless on the surface. But underneath the water, the feet are paddling furiously in the muck.
That's a very apt metaphor.
The more seamless and flawless a piece of velvet looks, the more grueling, hidden effort has been poured into it by people who will never wear it.
And the guilds ruthlessly protected that illusion. They guarded trade secrets like state intelligence. They restricted entry into the profession to keep the class barriers high.
Like a modern tech monopoly or something.
Exactly. If you lived in Venice and you tried to smuggle a velvet loom design or a specific dye recipe out of the city, the penalty was often death.
Hold on, I'm getting stuck on something here. When I read about these strict Renaissance guilds and the hidden labor, it feels so ancient. But did this exploitation, this hiding of the labor to protect the magic of the product, did that ever really modernize out of existence?
It's a completely fair question. And if we look at the modern textile data in our source stack, the answer is unfortunately no. The exploitation didn't disappear, it merely shifted and expanded.
So it's still happening.
Today, the guild masters are gone, but velvet production is heavily mechanized and fragmented across vast, opaque global supply chains.
So instead of a woman boiling cocoons in a back alley in Florence, it's spread across continents.
Exactly. The polyester fiber might be extruded in a petrochemical plant in one country. It is spun into yarn in a massive factory in a second country.
Right.
It is woven on automated industrial looms in a third country, dyed using harsh chemicals in a fourth, and sewn into a fast fashion garment in a fifth.
So the labor is arguably even more hidden now than it was in the 15th century.
Completely. The modern system maintains the illusion of accessible, effortless luxury for the consumer in London or New York, while heavily relying on wage suppression, lax environmental regulations, and highly repetitive factory labor in lower-cost regions globally.
We still want the magic of the velvet, and we still don't want to see the hands that made it.
Exactly right.
Which brings us to the psychology of why all this effort, blood, and treasure was expended in the first place. I mean, why go through the agony of silkworms, wire looms, and brutal labor practices?
Because velvet didn't just passively sit there looking expensive, it was actively weaponized by those in power.
Because the labor was so extreme and the material so astronomically expensive, velvet became the ultimate tool for social coding.
Yes, it was used to manifest authority. Royal robes, imperial thrones, papal vestments. It signaled divine mandate and earthly dominance simultaneously.
It separated the rulers from the masses, and not just culturally, but legally. I want to talk about sumptuary laws because to a modern listener, this concept is completely wild. It was literally legally a crime for certain classes of people to wear velvet.
Yes, sumptuary laws were edicts enacted by monarchs across Europe, from England to Italy to France, that strictly regulated consumption, specifically clothing, based on your exact social rank.
Let's paint a picture of this for the listener. Say I am a highly successful baker in 15th century Florence. I have worked hard, I run 5 bakeries, I am flush with cash. And I decide I want to show off my success.
Okay.
I go to a merchant, I buy a bolt of crimson silk velvet, and I have a tailor make me a beautiful coat. I walk out into the piazza. What happens to me?
You are immediately stopped by the civic authorities.
Really, just like that.
Because you are a tradesman, a commoner. It does not matter how much money is in your pocket. The laws explicitly state that crimson velvet is reserved only for nobility, high-ranking magistrates, or royalty.
So my money's useless. I can't buy my way into the elite class.
Exactly. The velvet is confiscated. You are hit with a massive, crippling financial fine.
Wow.
In some jurisdictions, if you are a repeat offender trying to wear velvet or cloth of gold, you could face imprisonment or public humiliation.
That is the ultimate velvet rope. We still use that phrase today, the velvet rope outside a nightclub. It means you are not on the list.
The elites recognized that if anyone could just buy the symbols of power, the power itself would be diluted. You had to be legally permitted by the state to display the status.
But I want to dig into how velvet enforces that boundary psychologically. Beyond the law, how does the fabric itself manipulate our brains?
Well, the source notes delve deeply into the psychology of haptics, the science of touch. Velvet is a textile built on intense contradiction.
Contradiction how?
On one hand, its physical softness produces an immediate biological feeling of intimacy. When you see something soft, your brain registers it as safe. It invites you to reach out. It feels pleasurable, almost indulgent against the skin.
But on the other hand, its sheen, its bottomless depth, and its historical association with extreme, untouchable wealth produce a profound sense of distance.
Yes. It is a material that simultaneously pulls you in and pushes you away. It says, look closely, admire my richness, but behave yourself. Do not touch me without permission.
It literally trains the eye and the body to be subservient. Think about how velvet is used in interior spaces. When you walk into a room with a velvet couch or a velvet-lined throne, it completely changes the acoustic and visual atmosphere of the room.
It dominates the space.
Let's do a thought experiment for the listener. Picture a classic grand theater. You are sitting in the audience, the show hasn't started yet, and you are staring at the massive, heavy curtain covering the stage. Why is that curtain almost always deep red velvet? It's not just a decorating trend that stuck around, is it?
No, it is entirely functional, but that function creates a psychological effect.
Okay, what's the function?
Functionally, the The dense three-dimensional pile of the velvet is one of the best acoustic dampeners in the world. It absorbs the echo of the crowd, quieting the auditorium, making the space feel more intimate and serious.
And visually.
Visually, it absorbs light perfectly. So when the house lights go down, the velvet curtain doesn't reflect the ambient light back into the audience. It becomes a dark, solid, heavy wall. It completely and utterly hides whatever stagecraft, whatever messy reality is happening behind it.
But psychologically, it builds massive anticipation.
Yeah.
It frames the illusion. The velvet tells the audience, what is hidden behind this heavy, luxurious barrier is important. We have spared no expense to hide it from you until the perfect moment. Prepare yourselves to be amazed.
It literally sets the stage for magic.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, velvet turns arbitrary material difference into visible, undeniable hierarchy. Whether it's a king's throne, a theater curtain, or even the soft lining of a tiny jewelry box holding a diamond ring.
Yes, velvet trains the human eye to perceive whatever it surrounds as inherently precious. It is a technology for making surfaces feel powerful.
So we have this absolutely perfect system of aristocratic control. Velvet is incredibly rare. It requires agonizing labor to make. It's legally restricted, so the new money can't touch it. And it psychologically commands obedience from the masses. It is a closed loop of power.
Until the machines arrive.
Right. But then the 18th and 19th centuries happen. What happens to a symbol of exclusive, untouchable power when someone invents a machine that can print it out by the mile?
The entire system shatters. The Industrial Revolution arrives, and the ancient rules of velvet are rewritten overnight. The mechanization of the loom completely fractured velvet's identity and its exclusivity.
Let's talk about the machines that destroyed the guild system. The notes highlight the transition from hand-powered wire looms to water-powered and eventually steam-powered looms.
A massive leap in production.
Suddenly, the agonizingly slow process of inserting brass wires and cutting them by hand is replaced by rapid, automated mechanical arms. But the real game changer, the machine that completely altered the trajectory of textiles and, frankly, human history, was the jacquard loom in 1804.
The jacquard loom is one of the most important inventions of the modern era. And you're right, it didn't just change velvet, it changed the world. Because the jacquard loom was, in essence, early computing.
Okay, break this down for me. How does a loom built in 1804 relate to a computer?
Remember those incredibly complex voided velvet patterns? The pomegranates and artichokes that required a master weaver to memorize exactly which threads to lift and which to leave flat?
Right, the tacit knowledge that took decades to learn.
Joseph Marie Jacquard invented a system that completely bypassed the weaver's brain. He used a series of stiff, heavy pasteboard cards punched with a matrix of holes.
Punch it cards.
Yes. These cards were laced together in a continuous chain and fed into a mechanism at the top of the loom.
Like a player piano.
Exactly. Inside the mechanism were rows of metal needles. Each needle was connected to a specific warp thread. As a punched card rotated into place, the needles pressed against it.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
If a needle hit a solid part of the card, it stopped, and the thread stayed down. But if a needle found a punched hole, it slid through, engaging a hook that lifted that specific thread up to be woven into the pile.
Hole equals up, solid equals down. That is literal binary code, 1 and 0.
It is. In fact, decades later, Charles Babbage used Jacquard's punch card concept as the foundation for his analytical engine, which was the theoretical first computer. Jacquard turned design into programmable, replicable logic.
So instead of a master artisan holding the pattern in his head, the machine held the memory. If you wanted a different pattern, you didn't have to hire a new master, you just swapped out the stack of cards.
It was revolutionary.
You could now produce intricate patterned velvet at a scale, speed, and exact replication that was previously unimaginable. The magic was no longer in the hands of the artisan, it was in the code.
And it wasn't just the mechanization of the looms, the very chemistry of the fibers began to change. Silk was the historical gold standard, but industrialization brought new, cheaper materials into the velvet structure.
First, we see the heavy rise of cotton velvet and velveteen.
Yes, cotton changed the game.
Cotton was much sturdier, a bit heavier, and more matte than silk. It didn't have that bottomless shimmer, but thanks to the brutal efficiency of the global cotton trade and plantation economies, it was vastly cheaper and faster to process than delicate silkworms.
And then as we move into the 20th century, the laboratory fully enters the textile world. We get the invention of rayon, which is often called artificial silk.
Rayon is fascinating because it's technically a semi-synthetic, right?
Correct. It is made by taking natural cellulose, usually from wood pulp or bamboo, and putting it through an intense, highly toxic chemical process.
Just breaking it down.
Right, breaking it down into a viscous liquid, which is then extruded into fine filaments. Rayon velvet mimics the fluid drape and intense sheen of silk beautifully, but it has a fatal flaw. It is incredibly weak when wet and crushes very easily.
And then the heavy hitter arrives. The great democratizer and the great polluter. Polyester in the mid-20th century.
The era of synthetics.
It's derived entirely from petrochemicals. It's basically extruded plastic thread. It is astronomically cheap to produce, highly durable, and it completely democratized the look of velvet. Suddenly, anyone with a few dollars could afford a velvet dress, a velvet sofa, a velvet pillow.
But this introduces a massive, unavoidable modern tension. Polyester stretch velvet makes the aesthetic of royalty available to the masses, but it introduces severe environmental consequences.
The notes pull data from the European Environment Agency on this.
They do.
Oh.
The EEA identifies synthetic textile washing and wear like throwing a fast fashion polyester velvet top into your washing machine as a major recognized source of microplastic shedding.
Oh, wow.
The friction of the water breaks off microscopic pieces of those plastic threads, which wash directly into the water system. It's estimated as the EU's fourth largest source of unintentional microplastic release.
So the cheap velvet is literally leaving a permanent, invisible plastic trace in the oceans.
Yes.
But to be fair to the data in the notes, natural fibers aren't entirely innocent either. We can't pretend silk and cotton are purely ethical.
No, we absolutely cannot. Silk involves the intense land use for mulberry trees and the boiling of millions of insects. Cotton requires massive amounts of water, pesticides, and a long history of exploitative labor. Rayon production involves heavy chemical runoff and deforestation.
So every fiber carries a heavy debt. But setting the environmental reality aside for a moment, let's look at the social impact of the machines, because I have a major question here. If the whole point of velvet's power throughout history was its extreme scarcity, hasn't that been completely destroyed? I mean, I can go to a fast fashion store in a suburban mall right now and buy a fake velvet shirt for $10. Doesn't cheap polyester completely break the sumptuary laws? The hierarchy is dead, right? The machines made us all equal.
You would logically think so. It's a very comforting thought to believe that mass production killed class hierarchy. But the reality of human behavior is much more stubborn.
What do you mean?
Progress doesn't actually eliminate hierarchy. It just multiplies the versions of the game. Velvet didn't die. It split.
It fractured.
Exactly. It fractured into two distinct realities: luxury velvet and commodity velvet.
Okay, define the boundary line between the two today.
Luxury velvet remains slow, rare, and exclusive. It is woven from silk or high-grade cotton blends, often still produced in heritage mills in Italy, utilizing complex woven patterns, and sold by high-end design houses for exorbitant prices.
And the commodity velvet.
Commodity velvet is the polyester stretch fabric. It is mass-produced, petroleum-based, sold in fast fashion, and designed to be worn for a season and discarded.
It's basically an imitation of the structure.
Yes. The status symbol didn't disappear at all. It just shifted from the material itself to the quality, brand, and origin of the material.
So a billionaire and a teenager at the mall might both be wearing a velvet jacket. To a quick glance across a dark room, they look similar.
Right.
But the billionaire's jacket is a $5,000 silk blend from a heritage house, tailored perfectly. And the teenager's is a $30 synthetic blend that will fall apart in a year. The hierarchy is still entirely intact. It's just coded differently.
Precisely. In the 15th century, the material itself said, "I am rare." Today, the material says, "I can be anything, but I will reveal exactly who you are based on which version you can afford."
That is a brilliant and slightly depressing way to frame it. The rules changed, but the game is exactly the same. However, because velvet split into these different tiers of accessibility, it stopped being a rigid, legally mandated uniform for kings and priests.
It became much more democratic in its meaning.
It became a fragmented language, and people started using that language to talk back, which brings us to a really fun part of the notes: the canvas of identity.
Yes, once the sumptuary laws were gone and the machines made velvet available, people started using it to construct their own identities, to play with gender norms, and to stage cultural rebellions.
Its physical structure remained exactly the same. It still trapped light, it still looked deep and heavy, but its cultural meaning became incredibly flexible. Let's trace this lineage, because the semiotics of fashion are wild here.
Let's do it.
We started in the medieval and Renaissance periods, where velvet was heavy, structured, and rigid. Think of the famous portraits of Henry VIII. Massive shoulders, stiff velvet. It was armor. It meant, I rule you by divine right.
Then, moving into the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, the rising bourgeoisie, the wealthy middle-class merchants and industrialists adopt it, but they soften it.
How so?
It becomes romanticized. You see middle-class women wearing velvet in deeply furnished Victorian parlors. It signals domestic refinement, emotional depth, and cultural aspiration.
And then we hit the 20th century, the 1920s and 30s. Hollywood arrives, and the camera changes everything. This is a massive shift in how velvet is tailored. It becomes liquid.
Yes, the invention of the bias cut. Designers like Madeleine Vianney figured out that if you cut the velvet diagonally across the grain of the fabric rather than straight up and down, it suddenly has this incredible elasticity.
It clings to the body. You have these silver screen femme fatales like Jean Harlow, Marlene Dietrich, wearing these slinky, liquid velvet gowns that drape like water.
It's a total shift in energy.
It's no longer about rigid kings in armor. It's about sensual, untouchable glamour. It is soft power. It says, I am beautiful, I am dangerous, and you cannot have me.
But perhaps the most fascinating cultural subversion of the fabric happens in the 1960s and 70s. This is where velvet truly flips on its head.
The counterculture. This is my favorite era in the notes. Rock musicians, bohemians, artists. You have Jimi Hendrix shredding a guitar in a bright purple crushed velvet suit. You literally have an iconic avant-garde band called the Velvet Underground.
Legendary band.
Why did the anti-establishment, anti-war, anti-corporate youth culture adopt the ultimate historical fabric of the establishment?
Because it was the ultimate irony. They understood exactly what velvet meant. They took a fabric that historically symbolized elite, corporate, aristocratic authority, and they wore it loosely, aggressively, and often cheaply.
And they wore it crushed.
Exactly. Remember what we said earlier. Crushing the pile ruins the dominance of velvet. It bruises the illusion.
Right.
By intentionally wearing violently colored, crushed velvet, they were taking the uniform of power and breaking it. When a rock star wears a crushed velvet suit, it says, I know the rules of your power, and I am choosing to mock them while wearing your clothes.
It's brilliant aesthetic warfare. And then that evolves into the 80s and 90s Gothic adoption. Black velvet becomes emotional armor for an entire subculture. It's dark, it's moody, it literally absorbs the light of a room and keeps the mainstream world at a distance.
It's perfect for a youth culture, built on introspection and aesthetic control.
And Today, we live in a completely fragmented reality where all these meanings exist at the exact same time. High fashion houses like Gucci, Dior, and Versace use heavy silk velvet on the runway to signal heritage and immense wealth, while simultaneously, fast fashion retailers are churning out synthetic crushed velvet for teenagers going to music festivals.
It's everywhere.
But there is one unifying factor today, and it involves the screens we stare at all day. Think about your social media feeds right now. Why does velvet look so incredibly good on Instagram and TikTok? The source notes have a perfect term for this phenomenon: algorithmic luxury.
It is the perfect material for the digital age. Cameras, especially the small lenses and digital sensors on our phones, absolutely love velvet.
Because of the way it traps light.
Yes, because it reacts so dynamically to lighting, especially the harsh directional light of a ring light. It creates instant visual richness, contrast, and depth on a flat, two-dimensional screen.
It looks expensive on camera, regardless of its actual physical quality. A $20 mass-produced polyester velvet dress can look like a $2,000 designer gown if the ring light hits the nap just right. It hacks the algorithm. It is algorithmic luxury.
Which proves that in a pop culture, velvet is almost never an accidental choice. Whether it's a celebrity staging a comeback on a red carpet or an influencer filming a video in their bedroom, velvet allows the wearer to command visual attention without having to shout. It stages the body.
It proves that velvet doesn't make you powerful or wealthy. It is simply a tool that helps you convince others that you are. It is a perception hack. And this idea of using a material to construct an outward persona that commands a room brings us to one of the most fascinating and honestly unexpected parts of our source notes.
Yes, the psychological profile.
I promised earlier we would talk about it. So, to set the stage for you listening, the researchers in these notes outline a subpersonality, a patterned way of behaving and interacting with the world, which they label the apex performer.
And they call her Liz.
They call her Liz. This is a profound way to understand the internal psychology of the material we've been discussing. Liz represents influence, seduction, aesthetic command, and strategic social positioning. She is the part of the human psyche that wants to be admired and feared simultaneously.
And her mindscape is very specific.
The researchers describe her internal mindscape, her metaphorical home base in the brain, as a literal velvet throne room filled with mirrors, indulgent aromas, strategic plots, and lip gloss.
It is entirely fitting that the psychological archetype of the apex performer builds her mental fortress out of velvet. Liz uses velvet not for physical comfort, but as a weapon of perception. It is her atmosphere.
For atmosphere, I like that.
When Liz enters a social space or operates within her velvet throne room, the metaphorical material helps her control the dynamic of the room before she even utters a single word.
Let's draw the direct parallel here, because the traits of Liz's identity and the physical traits of velvet are identical. Both are soft power made physical. They don't force you into submission with a hammer, they seduce you into agreement with a shimmer.
Very well said.
Both are intensely aware of status, both command the light in a room.
And crucially, both are completely reliant on highly controlled environments to survive.
Well,
Liz is a performer. Her confidence, her aesthetic command, her strategic social positioning, these aren't natural resting states.
they take effort.
They require constant, intentional, exhausting maintenance. She must curate her surroundings, her lighting, and her interactions perfectly, or the illusion shatters.
And there it is. I'm looking at Liz, the apex performer, and I'm looking back at our description of silk velvet from earlier, and I see the exact same tragic flaw.
The vulnerability.
Velvet crushes. It looks dominant, it absorbs the light, it projects immense power. But if you sit on it wrong, if you apply the wrong pressure, it scars. It bruises permanently. Liz, the apex performer, suffers from the exact same structural weakness.
It's a really powerful analogy.
She looks untouchable, but her confidence is armor made of upright threads. If the performance slips, if the audience rejects her, if she encounters genuine, unvarnished reality, the persona bruises. Her power is real, but it is exhausting to maintain because it is entirely reliant on the perception of others.
This raises an incredibly important question, not just about Liz, but about human nature itself. Is power still power if it must be constantly, exhaustingly performed to avoid being crushed?
That is a heavy thought.
Velvet perfectly exposes the exhausting reality of maintaining a dominant persona. It shows us that true, innate invulnerability doesn't actually exist in society.
Yeah.
There is only perfectly managed vulnerability.
Wow. The Velvet Throne Room is a beautiful, heavily guarded cage. And that brings us to the end of our source stack, to the philosophical mirror. Because Liz's struggle isn't just an isolated psychological profile in a research paper.
No, it's universal.
It's the exact same struggle humanity has had with value, status, and hierarchy since we first started boiling silkworms and weaving threads over brass wires in the 13th century.
Zooming all the way out, the philosophical core of these notes is staggering. Velvet ultimately represents the human ability to engineer perceived value out of thin air.
Out of thin air.
We take ordinary base fibers, protein from a worm, cellulose from a plant, plastic derived from oil. We arrange them vertically, we cut them with a blade, and suddenly, collectively, we agree that this new structure is superior. We agree that it represents divinity, wealth, and power.
It's mass delusion. But it is a beautifully mathematically engineered delusion. Let's summarize the ultimate contradictions we've uncovered today, because velvet is basically a walking, woven paradox. First, the tension of comfort versus control.
Velvet is incredibly soft, inviting, and physically pleasurable to touch. Yet, historically, it was ruthlessly restricted, regulated by sumptuary laws, and controlled by elites.
Right.
It teaches us that comfort and pleasure are often politically distributed. The fabric literally says, you can desire this, your body wants to touch this, but you may not be allowed to have it.
Second contradiction, authenticity versus performance. Historically, real velvet was hand-woven silk, backed by immense labor. Today, most of it is mass-produced synthetic polyester pumped out of factories. Yet to the human eye, especially on a digital screen, they can look practically identical.
So it forces us to ask, does it matter if it's cheap plastic, if it successfully tricks the eye into seeing luxury? Velvet forces us to question if authenticity is about the physical reality of the material or just the successful manipulation of perception.
And the final, perhaps most profound contradiction, beauty versus labor. Velvet appears effortless. It is smooth, rich, and luxurious. It looks like it just fell from heaven.
But its existence requires, and has always required, intensive labor, microscopic precision, and hidden, often brutal, exploitative systems.
From the women reeling silk in Renaissance Florence to the modern factory workers navigating global supply chains, Humans are visual hierarchy builders. We are so easily tricked.
We really are.
We look at the surface of the fabric, we see the bottomless depth of the color, we feel the softness against our skin, and we confuse that physical sensory input with inherent moral value. We think this looks rich, this feels heavy, therefore the person wearing it is important and I am not.
This raises a final thought, and perhaps the most dangerous truth revealed by the fabric. Beauty is the most effective way to make unequal systems feel acceptable.
Wait, say that again?
Beauty makes unequal systems feel acceptable. The velvet distracts us. It softens the harsh reality. The systems of labor, inequality, and legal control become invisible beneath the beautiful sheen of the nap.
That is chilling.
If you can control how something feels and looks, you can control how people rank it. And ultimately, if you control how people rank things, you control how they behave.
Velvet is basically a 13th century mind control technology that we still willingly, happily wrap ourselves in today. We buy it for our couches, we wear it to our holiday parties, we film ourselves in it for social media, completely oblivious to the fact that it is quietly, softly training us to obey a hierarchy.
It is the architecture of desire and dominance woven directly into cloth.
Well, to you, the listener who has been on this massive journey with us today, what a ride. We started with the microscopic life cycle of silkworms in China, watched women spin threads in Renaissance Italy, while men took the credit, witnessed the invention of early binary computing with the jacquard loom, rocked out with the counterculture in the 1970s, dissected the algorithms of modern TikTok luxury, and sat in the velvet throne room of the human ego.
All through the lens of one single, complicated, easily crushed structure of threads. It really changes how you look at the material world around you. It demands that we look past the surface of things.
It absolutely does. And so we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to test yourself with in the real world this week. Next time you walk into a beautifully curated, high-status space, maybe it's a high-end hotel lobby, a VIP airport lounge, or a classic, dimly lit theater, and you see a pristine, deep-hued velvet chair waiting for you, pay attention to your own body.
Watch what you do before you even realize you're doing it.
Exactly. Do you sit down casually, throwing yourself into it like it's a cheap canvas lawn chair? Or do you subtly adjust your posture? Do you sit a little straighter, a little more carefully?
Notice your hands, too.
Right. And when you stand up to leave, do you find yourself automatically brushing your hand over the nap to smooth it out, making sure it looks perfectly untouched after you dared to sit in it? Ask yourself in that exact moment, are you enjoying the luxury of the chair, or has the chair just successfully trained you to behave exactly how it wants?
It's a question worth asking every time we encounter something that demands our reverence.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the everyday world, keep looking beneath the surface, and we will see you next time.